let's be clear. Republicans honor local law enforcement. Democrats defund them. 5 years ago this summer, they spent the whole summer doing that. That's all you could hear from Democrats. Got to defund the local police. We've been consistent. We have condemned violence every single time it happened, whether it was January 6th, whether it was the summer of 2020. They haven't. Summer 2020, I still remember the guy standing in front of the burning building on CNN saying, "This is a mostly peaceful protest." They spent the whole summer trying to defund the police, so don't give us the lecture. I want to thank the fine gentleman from Mississippi who served in local law enforcement, who was a sheriff, who knows what it's like to go out there and protect his community, for sponsoring this resolution.
Delighted to hear the distinguished chairman of the Judiciary Committee denounce the assault, the violent assault on Congress, the Capitol, our police officers on January 6, 2021. I wonder if he would work with me to help enforce the law that was signed on March 15, 2022 by President Biden for a plaque to be placed in honor of the police officers who served us so valiantly and so bravely and saved our lives on that day. It was supposed to have been up by March 15th, 2023, and the speaker simply has remained non-committal and indifferent. The plaque is actually completed. It's ready to be put up. We can show it again. It's not as big as this poster, but it's the smallest token of recognition and honor that we should be able to extend to the Capitol officers, many of whom are still with us on the force, for their sacrifice and the sacrifice that their families made based on their work that day defending us. And I wonder if the chairman of the Judiciary Committee would follow through on, I think, his very impressive statement that we all denounce the violence of any kind against officers, including the more than 140 Capitol officers who were wounded, injured, hospitalized, some of them permanently disfigured and maimed on that day, as well as officers around the country. Now, on the point about defunding the police, look who's defunding the police. Elon Musk, Donald Trump, and their silent partners in Congress are defunding the police. They just terminated $500 million worth of grants, lost funding from the Department of Justice, providing federal support for local violence reduction by community police, community policing and prosecution, victim services, juvenile justice, child protection, substance abuse and mental health treatment, corrections and reentry, justice systems enhancements, research and evaluation, and other state, county, and local level public police and safety functions. And I brought this to the attention of the Judiciary Committee because, again, this was an operation by DOJ. We've got a federal district court opinion from Northern California saying that DOJ basically has no legal status because it wasn't created by Congress. So it might be a completely renegade operation, an attempt to create a fourth branch of government. In any event, those of us who voted for the money, and that's people on both sides of the aisle, voted for the money to be distributed by the Department of Justice to local grantees, didn't even know about this. And I shared with the chairman and with all the members of the committee the one name of the DOJ employee, an unelected bureaucrat, a juvenile bureaucrat from Silicon Valley who worked his way up through Tesla and so on and then ended up in DOJ, cut hundreds of millions of dollars to local police. They defunded the police. DOJ defunded the police. Donald Trump defunded the police, and I introduced an amendment to try to restore every single grant that they cut off in severing that in federal investment in local police. My colleagues uttered not a word in opposition to my amendment, but they all voted against it, simply because they're walking the line with Elon Musk right off the edge of the Constitution, because there's no constitutional grounding for anything that guy's doing, but they walked the line behind Elon Musk and Donald Trump, and they just defunded hundreds of millions of dollars from community law enforcement and public safety. So don't give me that lecture about defunding the police, which our side has never supported, but their side is just colluded in right now in terms of what the Department of Justice did. And that doesn't even get into their attempt to dismantle completely the ATF, shut down critical functions in the Department of Justice that protect us from foreign involvement in our elections, to take down the kleptocracy task force and so on. So I don't want any lectures coming in our direction either. Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I'll reserve my time.
The gentleman from Maryland reserves. The gentleman from Ohio is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. You can try to rewrite history, but it just doesn't work. Let me just read off the Democrat-run cities that did defund the police. And here's the game the Democrats won. All during the summer of 2020, they were saying defund the police. Democrats-run cities all over the country were doing so. And now they say, oh, but we want the federal taxpayers, because crime went up when we defunded the police. We want federal taxpayers to send us money to make up for the cuts we did there, and we spent the money elsewhere. That was the game. If you don't believe me, here's the list. Austin, Texas, $150 million cut. Boston, Massachusetts, $12 million cut. Burlington, Vermont, $1.1 million. Denver, Colorado, $55 million. Eureka, California, $1.2 million. Hartford, Connecticut, $2 million. Kansas City, Kansas, $42 million. Los Angeles, $150 million. Madison, Wisconsin, $2 million cut. Minneapolis, $8 million. New York City, $1 billion cut that summer. Norman, Oklahoma, $865,000. Oklahoma City, $5.5 million. Philadelphia, $33 million. Portland, Oregon, $16 million. Salt Lake City, $5.3 million. San Francisco, $120 million. Seattle, Washington, $69 million. Washington, D.C., $15 million. And we know about the crime that's happened in this city. And, of course, in the ranking member's home state of Maryland, Baltimore cut their police department $22 million. And now they're saying, oh, make sure the federal money keeps coming. And look, I'm not against some of these grant programs. We'll look at all those. But don't say you didn't defund the police. You did. Everyone knows you did, and you all talked about it, and you cheered it on. You said for the bad guys who harmed the police that summer when you were encouraging cities to cut the police, the bad guys who were you were raising money to bail them out. Your presidential candidate was raising money to bail them out. So you can have all the revisionist history you want. The facts are the facts. And with that, I reserve.
The gentleman from Ohio reserves. The gentleman from Maryland is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'd like to start just by asking my friend from Ohio if whether he's referring to me when he uses the word you, or if he's referring more generally to some other people, because I would categorically deny having done any of those things. I didn't, so perhaps if...
referring to that party that you belong to, not you personally.
Okay, well, the gentleman refers, and I think he's aware of this because he's an extremely clever debater, he referred exclusively to things that different local governments did or did not do. I don't know what Denver, Colorado did, or Burlington, Vermont, or whatever. I know what the United States Congress does. And we never defunded the police, and we never tried to defund the police. On the other hand, my good friend, I believe, participated in, and if he didn't, I'm happy to stand corrected, but I know a bunch of his colleagues said they wanted to defund the FBI, just like those who want to defund the ATF and shut it down right now. So that's a reality. But in any event, why don't we talk about what Congress can actually do? The president's new budget proposes to cut this. So this is something that my colleague and I could agree on. He wants to cut $1 billion across 40 Department of Justice grant programs which support local police departments to reduce violent crime, hate crime, and crime against women. Would my colleague work with me to oppose that suggestion in the president's budget? They want to cut $646 million from FEMA for violence and terrorism prevention. Why do they want to do that? I have no idea. They want to cut $545 million from the FBI, cutting its workforce by more than 2,000 personnel. That sounds like defunding law enforcement to me. I know they don't seem to be as fond of federal law enforcement as they are of local law enforcement, but do they really want to cut more than $500 million from the FBI to be fighting criminals and terrorists? I mean, I just, for the life of me, I don't understand how they can do that while they swear fealty to law enforcement. It just makes no sense. They want to cut $491 million from the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency, making our cyber and physical infrastructure far more vulnerable to attack by foreign bad actors like Vladimir Putin and President Xi and Kim Jong-un. I know there's some people in high levels of office who are fond of those people, who write Valentines to Kim Jong-un. But the rest of us would like to be protected from them. We should not be dismantling the cybersecurity infrastructure of America. They want to cut $212 million from the DEA. Now, can you imagine if a Democratic president had proposed any of this? They would be screaming. Their hair would be on fire. But Donald Trump proposed it, and they just mumble along like it's no big deal. What about all of these efforts to defund federal law enforcement, like the DOJ, FEMA, FBI? Will our colleagues work with us to restore that money? I'm happy to reserve.
The gentleman from Maryland reserves. The gentleman from Ohio is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Look, I have not said I was for defunding the ATF or the FBI. What I've said, what the American people have said clearly, is they don't want these agencies weaponized against the very people they're supposed to serve. We all know about the FBI. Think about this, though. When you think about the FBI's budget, it's like $12 billion. More than half of that budget, more than half of the personnel at the FBI are focused on intelligence and counterintelligence. I think most Americans probably think the FBI should spend most of its resources on going after traditional crime, organized crime, bad guys, gang activity. Well, I think that's probably where they think it should be, but no, they're spending half their budget, half their personnel on surveillance of Americans. I think that's a little different. How about the ATF? We all know the example of the ATF raiding Brian Malinowski's home. Brian Malinowski was the highest paid official in the Little Rock, Arkansas municipal government, ran the Bill and Hillary Clinton airport, gun hobbyist. The ATF thinks he's done something wrong. Instead of just going and visiting him, coming to see him, picking him up at his work, taking him back to his house to execute the warrant, the search warrant, no, they had to kick in his door, pre-dawn raid, 10 cars pull up. First thing you see on the doorbell cam is them putting tape on the camera. 53 seconds later, Brian Malinowski has been shot in the head and subsequently dies. So I'm for these agencies actually serving the taxpayers, not in being engaged in things like that. We respect the police who want it done right at the local level. God bless them. So I've not been for defunding them. We're for honoring local police, like this good sheriff, this member of Congress, and what they do day in and day out. That's what this resolution was about. But the other side, they want to come here and start talking about all kinds of things. I didn't intend to. I intended to, you heard my opening statement. You heard the gentleman's opening statement. But the other side wants to go start attacking things. Okay, fine. We're just setting the record straight. With that, I reserve.
The gentleman from Ohio reserves. The gentleman from Maryland is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Well, yes, the record is becoming increasingly clear here. My colleagues don't want to do anything about the dismantling of hundreds of millions of dollars of funds that we appropriated to the Department of Justice that have been mysteriously deleted by a DOJ employee from local law enforcement. These are grants that go to local police departments and victim assistance agencies all over the country. They got rid of that. Then the president comes forward with a budget that will cut more than $1.5 billion, maybe $2 billion from local law enforcement to go after violent crime, hate crime, to defend the victims of rape and sexual assault. My colleague changes the subject once again to talk about weaponization. We've never seen weaponization of the government like what we've seen under Donald Trump and his Department of Justice. The first thing they did was they got rid of a dozen experienced veteran criminal prosecutors in the U.S. Attorney's Office and the Department of Justice simply because they had worked to prosecute January 6 insurrectionists and rioters. Yes, let me repeat that. They fired prosecutors for doing nothing more than their jobs, to prosecute the criminals who beat the daylights out of our police officers, and they sacked all of those prosecutors. Some of the most experienced veteran prosecutors that we have in the U.S. Attorney's Office. Then he named to be the acting U.S. Attorney Ed Martin, and he was just forced to withdraw that nomination because he was standing by a neo-Nazi Holocaust revisionist who said that Hitler's problem was that he didn't finish the job, and who said that those who are born with disabilities should be killed at birth. And Ed Martin called him a great man and a great leader. Well, he withdrew the nomination, but still he put Ed Martin in the Department of Justice to a position that is not subject to Senate confirmation. They've weaponized the Department of Justice. They've weaponized the Department of State. They're going after anybody they describe as a political enemy. That Ed Martin was writing letters to members of Congress when he didn't like what they had to say. So we've never seen weaponization of the government like what's taking place right now. They took the U.S. pardon attorney, Liz Oyer, and they sacked her. Why? Because she refused to take the position that Mel Gibson should get his guns back, which wasn't part of her job, but they tried to conscript her to it. And she said the pardon attorney refused to do it because she said that was not her job and there were too many questions about domestic violence episodes. So if you want to have a separate hearing on weaponization of the government under Donald Trump, let's do it. In the meantime, let's support local law enforcement. Let's support federal law enforcement. Let's have another resolution praising all law enforcement for what they do, and let's get that plaque up. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I yield back to you.